History has frozen Queen Elizabeth I in an image of immaculate control, her pale face glowing with an almost supernatural purity, her posture rigid with authority, her gowns untouched by time, dust, or decay. And for centuries, this carefully preserved image has convinced the world that she lived above the physical discomforts of ordinary people. Yet the reality of Elizabeth's daily life was far more unsettling, because she ruled during an age that fundamentally misunderstood the human body, an age where hygiene was guided not by science, but by fear, superstition, and symbolism. And cleanliness was defined not by washing the body, but by hiding it, masking it, and performing purity rather than achieving it. Elizabeth was born into a 16th-century world that believed water could be dangerous, that frequent bathing weakened the body and opened the pores to deadly diseases. And this belief shaped her habits from a young age, meaning that the queen who ruled England for 44 years reportedly bathed only once every few weeks, or sometimes even less, a routine that modern society finds shocking, but which her contemporaries considered sensible and even cautious, because illness was thought to travel through damp skin and cold water, rather than through invisible organisms no one yet understood. Instead of washing her body, Elizabeth relied on clean linen undergarments to absorb sweat and bodily oils, changing these layers frequently while leaving the skin untouched, a system that created the illusion of cleanliness while trapping dirt, bacteria, and odor beneath fabric and perfume. And this illusion mattered far more than actual sanitation, because in Elizabethan culture, appearance was truth, and if something looked clean, smelled clean, and followed the rituals of cleanliness, then it was considered clean regardless of the physical reality beneath. Perfume, therefore, became one of Elizabeth's most important hygienic tools, not simply as a luxury, but as protection, because people believed disease traveled through foul air, and sweet scents were thought to shield the body from sickness, leading Elizabeth to surround herself with rosewater, lavender, musk, cloves, and ambergris, carried in pomanders, sewn into clothing, sprinkled across rooms, and rubbed onto skin, until her presence itself became a cloud of fragrance designed to overpower the natural smell of an unwashed body, though visitors to her court often remarked that the combined scent of perfume, sweat, smoke, and stale air was overwhelming rather than pleasant, a sensory reminder of how enclosed, crowded, and unsanitary royal spaces truly were. Dental hygiene reveals an even harsher truth about the cost of elite living, because Elizabeth lived at a time when sugar was a powerful status symbol, newly imported, brutally expensive, and consumed eagerly by the wealthy, and the queen herself loved sweets, candied fruits, sugar-based medicines, and syrups, all while lacking any real understanding of dental care, as toothbrushes, toothpaste, and preventive dentistry did not exist in any meaningful form, leading her teeth to rot, blacken, and fall out over time, a transformation that caused constant pain, infections, and difficulty speaking. Yet instead of being hidden in shame, her decayed teeth became a strange marker of status, with courtiers reportedly blackening their own teeth to imitate the queen, turning dental decay into a symbol of loyalty and fashion, even as Elizabeth herself suffered silently behind carefully controlled expressions and rigid court etiquette. The flawless white face immortalized in portraits was perhaps the most dangerous illusion of all, achieved through thick layers of white lead makeup known as Venetian ceruse, a toxic substance that slowly poisoned the skin while creating an appearance of perfection. And Elizabeth used it obsessively, not out of vanity alone, but necessity, because pale skin symbolized purity, nobility, and divine favor. And as the lead damaged her complexion, causing sores, scarring, inflammation, and hair loss, she responded by applying even more makeup to conceal the damage, trapping herself in a cycle where the very thing preserving her image was actively destroying her body. Yet abandoning it was unthinkable, because for a female ruler in a hostile, male-dominated political world, visible imperfection was weakness, and weakness invited rebellion. Her hair followed the same logic of concealment over care. As Elizabeth owned hundreds of wigs, many made of human hair dyed red to match her natural color, worn to project youth, vitality, and continuity, while hiding thinning hair and bald patches caused by illness, stress, and cosmetic damage. And these wigs were rarely washed properly, as water could ruin them, so they were instead aired, powdered, and perfumed, becoming breeding grounds for lice and grime, conditions so common that itching and discomfort were simply endured as part of daily life, hidden beneath layers of ceremony and control. Clothing, despite appearing pristine in paintings, contributed heavily to the unhygienic reality of court life, because Elizabeth's gowns were heavy, multi-layered, and nearly impossible to clean, accumulating sweat, body oils, candle smoke, and environmental filth over time, with outer garments brushed and scented rather than washed, while linen underlayers absorbed bodily fluids and were changed regularly, creating yet another illusion of cleanliness that masked long-term accumulation. And within the poorly ventilated stone palaces of the Tudor era, filled with burning candles, fireplaces, and crowded courtiers, these fabrics trapped heat, odor, and bacteria, turning royal spaces into sealed environments that modern humans would likely find unbearable within hours. Even the most basic bodily functions exposed the limits of Elizabethan hygiene, as toilets were primitive, sanitation systems barely existed, and chamber pots were commonly used even by the queen herself, emptied by servants whose proximity to royal waste reinforced hierarchy, but also eliminated any notion of privacy or personal sanitation, because Elizabeth's most intimate bodily needs depended entirely on the loyalty, discretion, and efficiency of others, turning the queen's body into both a political symbol and a physical vulnerability. Despite all of this, Elizabeth was not ignorant, lazy, or careless about her health, but deeply concerned with survival, longevity, and control, operating within a medical framework that blamed disease on bad air, imbalance of bodily humors, and divine will rather than germs, meaning that hygiene was defined by ritual, symbolism, and appearance rather than cleanliness. And Elizabeth mastered this system with extraordinary discipline, crafting a visual identity so powerful that centuries later it continues to overshadow the uncomfortable reality beneath it. Her hygiene habits were not personal failures, but reflections of a society that demanded perfection from its ruler while denying her the knowledge and tools to achieve actual health, forcing her to perform purity while living in conditions that contradicted everything her image promised. And when we strip away the layers of perfume, powder, and protocol, what remains is not a filthy queen, but a woman trapped inside an unhygienic world, enduring discomfort as the price of power, survival, and legacy, a reality that makes her story unsettling not because of dirt alone, but because it exposes how fear, ignorance, and tradition can transform suffering into normalcy and decay into spectacle, leaving us with the haunting realization that Queen Elizabeth I, despite ruling one of the greatest empires of her age, could not escape the physical limitations of her time, and lived daily with habits that remind us how fragile the line between royal grandeur and human vulnerability truly is. As Queen Elizabeth I grew older, the carefully maintained illusion of control that had defined her reign began to crack, not publicly, but privately, inside a body that had endured decades of neglect disguised as tradition, because the hygiene practices that once seemed manageable in youth became increasingly punishing with age, and the queen who had ruled England with unmatched authority now found herself battling the slow rebellion of her own physical form. Her teeth, already weakened by years of sugar consumption and primitive dental care, deteriorated further, causing chronic pain, infections, and difficulty eating, and by her later years, Elizabeth reportedly struggled to speak clearly, a cruel irony for a ruler whose power had always depended on command, rhetoric, and presence. Yet even then she refused to acknowledge weakness, choosing silence and withdrawal over public exposure. allowing rumors to circulate rather than allowing the world to witness the physical cost of her reign. The damage caused by years of lead-based makeup became impossible to fully conceal, as her skin cracked, blistered, and scarred beneath layers of ceruse, forcing her to apply even thicker coatings to maintain the illusion of ageless purity, while the poison slowly entered her bloodstream, weakening her body from within, a sacrifice she accepted because in Elizabeth's world, a queen's face was not her own, but a political surface upon which stability, legitimacy, and divine authority were projected. Bathing habits remained unchanged even as her health declined, because fear outweighed logic, and the belief that water could invite disease still dominated medical thinking, leaving Elizabeth reliant on linen, perfume, and ritual rather than actual cleanliness, while her aging body produced stronger odors, discomfort, and vulnerability, all of which were masked rather than treated, reinforcing the idea that hygiene was something to be displayed, not practiced. Isolation increasingly defined her later years, especially during outbreaks of plague, when Elizabeth withdrew from court to avoid contagion. Yet this isolation often worsened hygienic conditions rather than improving them, as sealed rooms, fewer attendants, and limited ventilation created stagnant environments where air grew heavy and decay lingered, turning protection into another form of confinement. The psychological weight of hygiene became heavier than the physical discomfort because Elizabeth was no longer merely maintaining cleanliness, but defending an identity she had spent her entire life constructing, an identity that could not age, weaken, or show decay without threatening the stability of the realm itself, forcing her to live inside a performance that allowed no rest, no honesty, and no escape. Servants played an increasingly critical role in sustaining this illusion, managing her chamber pots, clothing, wigs, and cosmetics, handling the most intimate aspects of her body while remaining invisible in historical memory, reinforcing the hierarchy that defined royal life, where power depended not on independence, but on dependence disguised as authority. Hygiene, in this sense, became an instrument of control rather than comfort, as Elizabeth's body was disciplined, regulated, and concealed in service of the crown, leaving little room for personal well-being, privacy, or dignity as we understand it today, and turning her physical existence into a political responsibility rather than a human experience. Despite these conditions, Elizabeth continued to rule effectively, making calculated decisions, managing court rivalries, and maintaining England's stability, proving that physical discomfort did not diminish her intellect or resolve. But this endurance came at a cost, because her later years were marked by exhaustion, melancholy, and withdrawal, symptoms that modern observers might recognize as the cumulative toll of decades spent suppressing bodily reality beneath ritual and image. When Elizabeth died in 1603, the world mourned a legend, not a body, and the myths surrounding her reign quickly absorbed her humanity, preserving the immaculate virgin queen while erasing the physical truth of how she lived, because history prefers symbols over sensations, portraits over pain, and legacy over lived experience. Yet when we look closely, when we read between the lines of ceremonial records and flattering accounts, a different story emerges, one that is not about filth alone, but about the human cost of power in an era that demanded perfection without understanding the body that carried it. Elizabeth's hygiene habits were not shocking because they were uniquely bad, but because they were normal for her time, reminding us that progress is fragile and that what we consider basic dignity today was once unimaginable even to the most powerful woman in the world. Her life forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that power does not grant cleanliness, that crowns do not repel decay, and that authority cannot override biology, no matter how carefully it is dressed, perfumed, or painted. In the end, Queen Elizabeth I did not fail hygiene. Hygiene failed her, because it was built on fear rather than knowledge, performance rather than care, and tradition rather than understanding, trapping even the greatest ruler of her age inside a body she could never fully protect. And perhaps that is the most unsettling legacy of all, because when the perfumes faded, the makeup cracked, and the rituals ended, what remained was not a queen, not a symbol, not an icon, but a human being who endured discomfort, decay, and silence so that an empire could believe in her perfection, leaving us with the haunting realization that history remembers crowns far more kindly than it remembers bodies, and that behind every polished legend lies a truth that was never meant to be seen, only survived.